They said some invitations should never be sent, because once they're opened, the past doesn't stay buried. It comes back wearing a crown. That night, one message crossed the border and changed everything. Old wounds reopened, loyalties shifted, and someone the world had forgotten was about to return. Not for revenge, not for forgiveness, but to remind them all that rejection has a price. Stay close, because this story doesn't start with love. It starts with a mistake. The news of the beta's engagement spreads like wildfire, a union designed to polish his reputation and erase the ghost of his past. The pack celebrates, pretending the past never happened, pretending the name Lyra was never whispered through their halls with shame. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. Somewhere far beyond their borders in the frozen courts of the Northern Kingdom, a single letter finds its way into the wrong hands, or perhaps the right ones. The invitation, written in gold and arrogance, was never meant for the girl he rejected. Yet when the Alpha King sees it, something shifts behind his cold, unreadable eyes. To him, this isn't about love. It's about power and curiosity, the dangerous kind that can start wars. Lyra, the once broken Omega, lives quietly under his protection, far from the pack that threw her away. She has rebuilt herself in silence, her scars now her armor. But when that letter is placed before her sealed with the beta's crest, she doesn't tremble. She smiles. A quiet, knowing smile that chills even the Alpha King. "What will you do?" he asks. Her voice doesn't shake. "Attend." But the king's reply cuts deeper than any command. His tone is low, possessive, final. "If you attend this ceremony, you won't go as a ghost." He steps closer, eyes burning through the air between them. "You'll go as mine." And just like that, the game begins, not of love but of power, pride, and unfinished vengeance. The invitation wasn't a message of peace. It was the spark that would set kingdoms on fire. The ceremony was meant to be flawless. Silk banners, polished stone, and the illusion of control. Every rank in the pack gathered, expecting a night of unity. Instead, silence fell so sharp it cut through the music when the doors opened. Lyra stood there. Not the trembling Omega they remembered, but a vision carved from defiance itself. The gown she wore shimmered like midnight steel, neither soft nor fragile. A warning wrapped in elegance. Her scent didn't carry the weakness they once mocked. It carried dominance. A quiet, impossible kind that unsettled even the alphas. The beta's glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the floor. His fiancée clutched his arm, confused by the ghost that suddenly stood before them all. The elders exchanged wary glances. No mark burned on Lyra's neck, yet every wolf in the room bowed their heads without knowing why. Then came the voice that silenced every whisper. The Alpha King stepped forward, his presence colder than the northern winds that followed him. He didn't boast, didn't raise his tone. He only said, "My companion." 2 words. That was all it took for the entire hall to understand. She wasn't just a guest. She was under his claim. And that claim was not affection. It was declaration. The beta tried to regain his composure, to force a smile, to act as though his heart hadn't just been ripped open. But his wolf inside him howled with something he couldn't control: regret. As the music faltered and the murmurs rose, Lyra's gaze found his. Calm, controlled. But her eyes told the story of every night she had begged the moon for mercy. She stepped closer, voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried across the hall like thunder. "You taught me how to survive rejection," she said, her lips curving in a faint, devastating smile. "Let me return the lesson." And in that instant, the balance of power shifted. The ceremony meant to celebrate love became the night every wolf learned. The rejected Omega had returned, and she was no one's victim anymore. The aftermath of the ceremony lingered like smoke, heavy, choking, impossible to ignore. The beta tried to smile through it, tried to convince himself that what he saw was just a trick of the light, a cruel reminder of what he'd thrown away. But no matter how many times he told himself she was nothing, his pulse betrayed him. Lyra's calmness wasn't submission. It was control. Every meeting, every toast, every fleeting glance reminded him that the room no longer looked to him for leadership. They looked to her. At night, his fiancée tried to reach him, her voice trembling as she asked the questions she already feared the answers to. "Do you still think about her?" He lied, of course. He said no. But the lie tasted like iron. And when she turned away, tears silent on her cheek, he felt the first crack form in the alliance he had built his entire future on. While he wrestled with ghosts, the Alpha King convened with the council behind closed doors. His tone was sharp, commanding, the sound of a ruler who didn't ask permission to speak. The Omega was never weak, he said, eyes narrowing. She was hidden, because someone feared what she could become. The elders exchanged nervous looks. Some denied knowing anything. Others stared at the floor, unwilling to meet his gaze. But in their silence, the truth began to take shape. Lyra's rejection hadn't been an accident. It was a sentence. Outside the chamber, Lyra walked the courtyard alone. Wolves she'd never met stopped mid-step, lowering their heads without realizing why. Her voice, even when soft, carried weight, a rhythm that pulled obedience from the air itself. Not magic, not manipulation, authority, the kind that came from surviving what should have broken her. One guard stumbled forward, breath hitching, eyes wide with instinct he couldn't fight. He dropped to one knee before her, his voice shaking. "My queen." Lyra froze. The word struck her harder than any blade. Around them, silence spread, thick and unyielding. The soldier's head bowed, not to the Alpha King's Luna, not to a ruler, but to the one they had once cast aside. And from the balcony above, the beta watched, realizing too late that the woman he rejected wasn't haunting his past. She was rewriting his future. The council hall reeked of tension and incense, an old trick to mask fear. Torches burned low, shadows dancing across carved stone as the elders gathered in judgment. At the center stood Lyra, unbound, unflinching, her silence louder than any defense. The accusation was clear: witchcraft. The reasoning was laughable. "Wolves obey her without command," one elder spat. "No mark, no bond, no Alpha's claim. It defies nature." The Alpha King sat at the head of the table, expression unreadable, eyes gleaming with quiet amusement. He didn't intervene. He didn't defend her. Instead, he leaned back, letting the scene unfold like a play he'd written long ago. His silence was permission, not to condemn her, but to expose them. Lyra stood alone in the circle, her hands clasped before her. Each accusation hit the air like venom, but she didn't flinch. She had faced rejection once. This was nothing. Then came the turn no one expected. An elder older than memory itself spoke with trembling lips. "It was foretold," he said, voice breaking. "An Omega would rise, not by dominance or bloodshed, but by command alone. Her words would bend Alphas. Her presence would end wars. We could not allow it." Gasps filled the chamber. The prophecy, long dismissed as myth, was now confession. The beta's chest tightened. He turned to the elders, his voice sharp, desperate. "You used me?" The answer was written in their silence. He hadn't been a savior or a leader, only a tool. The rejection he thought was his choice had been orchestrated, scripted by fear. Lyra's eyes finally lifted, calm, distant, not anger, clarity. And as chaos erupted, council shouting, guards stepping forward, the Alpha King rose. His footsteps echoed like thunder against marble. He approached her slowly, every motion deliberate. When he reached her, he bent close enough that only she could hear. His voice was low, steady, dangerous. "You were never meant to be his Luna. he whispered, eyes burning into hers. You were meant to be my weapon. The words weren't affection. They were prophecy fulfilled, a truth spoken too late to be undone. And as he turned to face the trembling council, Lyra realized something far worse than manipulation or fate. The Alpha King hadn't saved her. He had waited for her. By dawn, the rumors had already spread beyond the palace walls. Every messenger who left the capital carried two stories. One official, one whispered. The official version said the Omega stood trial and was spared by royal mercy. The whispered one said she made the council kneel without lifting a finger. The second story spread faster. Across the packs, wolves began to choose sides in silence. Sigils were erased from banners. Pledges of loyalty were rewritten behind closed doors. The elders called it blasphemy. The warriors called it instinct. They didn't know why, only that the name Lyra no longer sounded like weakness. It sounded like destiny. Inside the palace, tension clawed at every wall. The Beta's alliance was unraveling by the hour. His fiancée's family, nobles of an influential southern pack, demanded he sever all contact with the Northern King or forfeit the engagement. The council warned that another scandal would mean civil war, but the Beta could barely think beyond the echo of her name. Lyra. The ghost he'd tried to bury had returned, not as a wound, but as a threat to everything he'd built. While his world burned, Lyra slipped away from the noise. With only moonlight for company, she followed a forgotten trail through the woods, a path she once knew as home. What remained of her childhood den was ash and rot. The house she'd dreamed in, the walls that had heard her sob through rejection, were now bones of blackened timber. She knelt among the ruins, fingers brushing through soot until they found something solid. A small, iron-bound journal hidden beneath the hearthstone. Her mother's scent lingered faintly in the pages. The handwriting trembled, ink smeared with old fear. If you are reading this, it means the king kept his promise. He swore no one would touch you again, not after what happened to your father. But remember, Lyra, debts to alphas are never paid in full. The words struck harder than any blade. The Alpha King, the man who had saved her, guided her, used her, had also killed for her bloodline. When Lyra returned to the fortress, the hall was empty but for him. The king stood near the window, bathed in silver light, looking as though he had been waiting all along. She dropped the journal at his feet. Her voice was quiet, but each word cut clean. "Did you save me?" she asked, eyes burning through the calm mask he wore. "Or just claim your debt?" The silence that followed was heavy enough to bend the air. The king didn't answer, and that was answer enough. Outside, the moon broke through the clouds, crimson and full, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath for what would come next. The night air was still when he finally spoke. "I didn't save you for prophecy," the Alpha King said, voice stripped of its usual command. "I saved you because once long ago you saved me." Lyra stood motionless, the words hanging between them like fog. "What are you talking about?" He turned toward the window, the moon's pale light casting sharp lines across his face. "I was no king then, just a boy running from my father's executioners. I fell into a ravine and would have died there. But a little girl found me. Small, covered in mud. She shared her bread and told me not to be afraid. I never forgot her scent." Lyra's breath caught. The memory came like a flicker. A wounded boy, shivering in the forest, her mother's warning echoing not to speak to strangers. She had helped him anyway. "You," she whispered. He nodded once. "When I saw your name on that letter, I realized fate wasn't cruel. It was patient. The truth should have brought comfort. It didn't. It felt like chains. Invisible. Familiar. Their silence stretched until tension blurred into something dangerous. The kind of stillness where hatred and longing become the same thing." He stepped closer, his presence consuming the air between them. She didn't move. Couldn't. The pulse in her throat betrayed her calm. "You think saving me was debt," she said quietly. "Maybe you're just afraid of what happens if I stand without you." He smiled, a sharp, unreadable thing. "Maybe I'm afraid of what happens if you do." Unseen, beyond the doorway, the beta watched, his heart twisted, part jealousy, part fear, but mostly realization. The king, the most feared alpha in the north, had a weakness, and it wasn't a blade, it was her. That night, he met with his remaining loyalists in the dark cellars beneath the great hall. The walls still reeked of wine and old betrayal. He didn't shout, he didn't rage, he simply gave an order. "The full moon feast," he said. "Strike when they least expect it. Don't touch the girl, the king dies first." And as the men bowed and left, he stared into the flickering torchlight, convincing himself it was justice, not vengeance. Above them, the moon began to rise, full, silver, and heavy, casting its cold light over two fates bound by blood and history. Neither of them knew that the feast meant to celebrate peace would end in blood. The night of the full moon feast began in perfection. Polished silver, crimson banners, and the scent of roasted game filling the hall. Music played, laughter echoed, and every eye in the kingdom watched the Alpha King and his companion. It was meant to be a display of unity, of power, a message to the world that the northern throne stood unshaken. But beneath the surface, blades waited in the dark. Lyra sensed it first. Not the sound, but the shift. The way every wolf's breath caught at once, the faint scent of iron cutting through the wine. Her fingers brushed the edge of the king's sleeve. He looked at her, and in that instant, both knew what was coming. The first strike came fast, a dagger from the shadows aimed straight for the king's heart. He caught it mid-air, but the second assassin was already behind him. Lyra moved without thought, shoving him aside. The blade grazed his side, drawing blood, crimson against white linen. Chaos erupted, screams, tables overturned, soldiers clashing with unseen enemies. The king staggered, blood dripping onto the marble. Lyra knelt beside him, her hands steady even as her pulse roared in her ears. "Stay still," she ordered. But when another blade came for them, something inside her broke, or perhaps awoke. She rose slowly, eyes burning gold under the torchlight. The hall trembled with a force no one could name. The assassins froze mid-step. Every wolf in the room felt it. That pull, that instinct older than bloodlines. Kneel. One word. That was all. And like a tide obeying the moon, they fell. Warriors, nobles, servants, every one of them on their knees before her. Even those who fought the command trembled under the weight of it. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was law. The music had stopped. The fire crackled. The prophecy, once dismissed as legend, had just come alive before their eyes. The beta, watching from the shadows, felt his world collapse. His assassins dead, his plan ruined, his name already cursed by the power he had tried to contain. He fled before the king's guards could find him. But not everyone escaped. His fiancée, trembling, blood splattered on her silks, was dragged to the center of the hall. The wolves stepped aside as Lyra approached her. The woman looked up, terrified, waiting for the strike that never came. Lyra leaned close, her voice soft but sharp as ice. "Tell him," she said. "I didn't come to ruin his ceremony." She paused, her eyes flicking toward the moonlight spilling through the shattered windows. "I came to end it." The hall was silent again, but it wasn't peace. It was surrender. The beta returned before sunrise, the scent of blood still clinging to his cloak. The roads were empty, the air thick with whispers. Every guard he passed lowered their eyes, not out of respect, but pity. By the time he reached the council chamber, he already knew what waited inside. The elders stood in a semicircle, silent as executioners. Their verdict was short, merciless. You failed your oath, one said. You endangered the pack. You invited chaos. I was trying to protect us, he argued, voice breaking with the strain of everything he'd lost. From what? Another elder hissed. From her? The Omega who commands more loyalty than you ever earned? The Beta's composure shattered. He slammed his fist against the table, the sound echoing like a plea for relevance. But the council had already turned away. In the hierarchy of wolves, his name was now just an echo. While his throne crumbled, Lyra stood at the northern balcony of the palace, the moonlight glinting off her unmarked skin. The Alpha King approached quietly, his wound bandaged but not healed. There was no crown on his head now. Only a man, weary yet unyielding. You could end this war, he said softly. Stand beside me as Luna. Be my equal in title, if not in blood. Lyra turned to face him, her expression unreadable. I won't trade one cage for another, even if it's made of gold. He stepped closer. This isn't a cage. It's power. No, she said, voice low but steady. It's dependence. And I've had enough of men who think they're saving me when they're just afraid of what I'll do alone. The silence that followed was sharp, electric. Two forces, dominance and defiance, colliding in a space too small for both to survive. The tension between them was more than attraction. It was recognition of strength, of danger, of the same fire mirrored back. You challenge me at every turn, he murmured. You make it too easy, she replied. And yet beneath the clash, something shifted. Something neither could fight anymore. The bond between them pulsed, raw and alive. No mark to define it, but impossible to ignore. He reached out, fingertips brushing her jaw. If you won't take my mark, he said quietly, then take my strength. Before she could speak, he broke the sacred rule, one older than any prophecy. His teeth grazed her skin, not to claim her, but to share his power. The bite was brief but searing, a rush of heat that ignited every nerve in her body. The mark glowed faintly before fading, leaving no visible trace, only the hum of energy between them. Lyra staggered back, breath trembling. What have you done? The Alpha King's eyes burned gold beneath the moonlight. Balanced the scales. For the first time she felt it, his power running through her veins, but not as chains, as choice. And somewhere in the distance, the Beta heard the howls of wolves swearing loyalty to a new kind of rule, one unmarked, unbound, and unstoppable. The Beta vanished for weeks. To most, he was presumed dead, another casualty of the failed coup. But death was too merciful for his pride. He resurfaced in the borderlands, gathering the broken and bitter, alphas who'd lost their rank, warriors stripped of honor, wolves too proud to kneel before an unmarked Omega. They called themselves the True Pack, and under his banner, old rivalries turned into alliances. He fed them fear, like it was scripture. The king is no longer fit to lead, he declared before a roaring fire. He's fallen under her spell, a creature without mark, without law. If we don't act now, every alpha will bow to an Omega. By the next moon, the south was burning. The northern throne, once untouchable, was surrounded by its own kind. Inside the citadel, Lyra stood over a map strewn with pins and torn parchment. Her wound, a thin scar from the feast, still throbbed, but she ignored it. Around her, generals argued, voices heavy with fear and doubt. The king's injuries had left him too weak to command, and whispers filled the halls. The Omega is giving orders now. When Lyra spoke, the room went silent. Her tone was calm, but the authority in it left no space for disobedience. Form 2 lines, one visible, one unseen. They'll expect a king's defense. Give them a queen's. The old generals exchanged uncertain glances, but no one dared to question. Her power wasn't shouted, it was felt. By dawn, the northern banners rose over the misted fields, and Lyra rode at the front, Not behind the king, not guarded in the rear, but leading. The wolves who once spat at her feet now followed her howl into battle. When the armies clashed, the sky turned gray with smoke and ash. The Beta's soldiers charged like fury unleashed, but Lyra moved through them like the moon through cloud, precise, relentless, inevitable. Every command from her lips reshaped the field, every word a law that hearts obeyed before minds could resist. At last, in the chaos of fire and steel, she found him. The Beta, broken armor, pride intact, still clinging to the ruins of his cause. Their eyes met across the battlefield, predator and prey, but neither the same as before. He raised his sword. "You were nothing without me." Lyra stepped closer, blood streaking her arm, her voice steady as winter. "No, I was nothing because of you." Their clash was brutal, fast, filled with years of unspoken hatred. When it ended, his blade lay in the mud, her hand at his throat. The soldiers fell silent around them, watching the moment history would turn. She could have killed him, should have, but instead she let the silence draw tight, the weight of her power pressing down until he trembled. Then, softly, too softly for the cruelty of it, she spoke. "Crawl." The word struck like lightning. His knees hit the ground, his pride shattering louder than bone. The warriors around them watched in stunned reverence as the once feared Beta obeyed, crawling through the dirt at the feet of the woman he'd destroyed. Lyra turned away, her eyes cold but wet with something only she would ever understand. This was not vengeance, it was justice. And as she walked back toward her army, the wolves began to chant, not the king's name, not hers by blood, but the one the prophecy had promised. The unmarked queen. The hall was the same cold stone, the same banners, the same crescent moon carved above the throne. But the air was different now. Gone was the scent of arrogance and pretense. In its place lingered silence, reverent, waiting. It was here, in this hall, that Lyra had once been stripped of her dignity. Here, her name had been spat like a curse. Here, the pack had watched her rejection and called it justice. Now, they stood on their knees. Lyra entered, not draped in jewels or crowns, but in battle-worn black. No mark on her neck, no symbol of ownership. Just power, quiet, controlled, undeniable. The Alpha King waited at the end of the hall, his wound healed, his posture not of dominance but respect. As she approached, the elders bowed. The soldiers lowered their heads. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. When she stopped before him, he knelt. The most feared Alpha of the North, the man who had once commanded armies with a glance, now bowed to the Omega he had called his equal in strength. His voice was low, deliberate, carrying through the hall. "You were never beneath me," he said, "but I would still be honored to stand beside you, not as your ruler, as your bond." He held out his hand, the mark burning faintly on his skin. A silent offer. The same mark she had refused before. Lyra looked down at it, the hall holding its breath. Then she reached out, but not to take it. Her fingers brushed his wrist, and a faint golden light pulsed between them. The power that passed wasn't submission, it was balance. "I accept," she said softly, "but only if it binds us both." Then she bit his hand, not as an Omega to an Alpha, but as one soul to another. The room flared with light, two energies intertwining, indistinguishable. His mark glowed upon her skin, and hers upon his, the first shared bond in wolf history. The packs knelt lower, not because of fear, but awe. The prophecy, the one that spoke of an Omega who would dethrone Alphas without blood, had not been a threat. It had been a promise. No crown, no chains, just choice. When the light faded, the Alpha King rose beside her. He did not claim her hand. He extended it. Open, equal. Together they turned to face the wolves who had once called her unworthy. "Rise," Lyra commanded. Her voice carried through every heart in the room. You bow to no crown today. You rise for something greater, the end of fear. And they did. Every wolf stood, united not under dominance, but under her strength. Later, when the hall emptied and the moon hung high above the shattered glass roof, Lyra walked to the balcony. The night was quiet again, peaceful in a way it had never been. She looked up at the moon that had once witnessed her rejection and smiled faintly. I was never rejected, she whispered. You all just weren't ready. The wind shifted, carrying her words across the kingdom. A new law, written in the silence of the stars. The story that began with an invitation ended with a revolution, and the world of wolves would never be the same again.